it seems like the call to love is to find our way into right feeling, or right aligning our feelings and emotions toward those of both the oppressor and the oppressed. Most importantly, perhaps, to right align with the oppressed, and feel empathy and care and grief and lament and the pain that they must be going through in order to kind of identify and then perhaps pray better or know what to say in public better. And when we're operating out of these right emotions, these right responses, we become better suited to have a meaningful impact, to say fitting words of comfort, or critique when it's called for.
One of the pieces I appreciate about your work of bringing together in your book a number of things that aren't typically brought together, so prayer and speaking out, is this sense that then that speaking out circles back and informs a very different kind of praying. I mean, there's this sort of mutual change that happens, and as I pray differently, then I might speak out differently. There's this kind of sense that if we put them together and we don't normally think of them together, it could reinvigorate both sides of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is right at the heart of virtue ethics, isn't it? So your distinction, this empathy thing, Evan, I think is really interesting because I'm interested in it. And one of the books that I use in my ethics class is a book by William Spahn, who was a Jesuit. I mean, fascinating life himself, and it's called Go and Do Likewise, Jesus and Ethics. I love that book. And he talks about he has the image of the tripod of scripture, so he really looks at scripture as the narrative, spirituality, and then virtue ethics, and brings these things together. And makes the claim, two things, makes the claim that without empathy, ethics is impossible. I mean, without any kind of ability to connect with the plight of another person, I mean, ethics is, the moral life is impossible, maybe is a better way to say that. I mean, people without empathy, we tend to call sociopaths, right? And their behavior is explained because they have no regard. The other thing, he makes this distinction between emotions and affections. So I think your comment is interesting, and it's something I've thought about, but haven't done much about anyway, is that he's a little bit suspicious of feelings.
Yeah.
Because feelings, are legitimate reactions to trigger events. I'm not a psychologist, the wife of one, but that's, as far as my expertise goes. But they're responses. And there's always an unpredictability. Even though they can be explained, there's an unpredictability to them. Where the crux of the Christian life is this idea of right loves, which he puts at the level of affections. And for Spahn, affections can be tutored. That's a language that he uses in a way that feelings cannot, which is a really I think kind of a powerful image. So when I think about the task of pastoral ministry, the task of spiritual formation is how do we ourselves learn to love the right things? How do we help others learn to love the right things? And I think the particular challenge, that kind of taking us back to your first question, in our contemporary context, this means often working against something I would naturally be inclined to do, which is the heart of the spiritual practices. Right? The time I should pray is when I don't want to pray is when I should actually pray. And I think, kind of the language of duty, the language of those are kind of bad words. Heaven forbid I do something that I do not want to do. That I don't feel like doing.
Do it routinely for a long period of time.
And do it routinely so that, and in a way, and I mean, this is the role of the virtues. And this is what I think, the grand theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, they're not just virtues, they're actually practices as well.
It's very much a master-apprentice kind of relationship, where to be tutored, right? For the affections to be tutored is to willfully put yourself under the tutelage of a master and be guided, acknowledging the whole way, I don't know my way, but let me follow you and follow your example. And this is again, this brings us back into some of the particularity of we receive principles. We receive love your enemy, love your neighbor, love God. But we receive an example. We receive a life. So it's always in the context of a life narrative. And this is maybe where the storied nature of Christian ethics is on display. That we can learn so much from a life devoted to following that path, a life dedicated to love and following that path. And this is what is so inviting about the stories of profound love and forgiveness and charity and generosity. It speaks to us, and it calls us to follow. Kind of speaks to the gaps in our lives.
Eugene Peterson has a book called The Long Obedience in the Same Direction.
That's a great title.
The title just, and sometimes the long loyalty in the same direction, the long set of obligations in the same direction. There's something very beautiful about it. You were mentioning earlier as we were talking, this idea that sometimes love of a spouse means love in the care of someone with Alzheimer's, which is a long obedience or a long loyalty in the same direction, and a way of ending life in a very different way than you probably ever anticipated. But it's this sort of beautiful picture, and I think I was telling students not too long ago, I think we need to recapture the beauty of loyalty in our cultural context. And that can be obligation, faithfulness. Walter Brueggemann recently called it, what did he call it? Oh, I can't remember, not steadfastness, but it was this fealty, or fidelity and fealty. Yeah. This idea of capturing that as renewed virtue, whether our context will view it that way or our culture will go that direction. It is a powerful story. That's why we celebrate these 50 or 60-year marriages, right? Because we love this long loyalty in the same direction. And I think the scriptures are all about that. And it's not about this perfection, even at the end of the Sermon on the Mount or the antitheses where you hear, be perfect, teleos, as your Heavenly Father is perfect, be whole, loyal, wholly loyal, wholly consistent. It's about integrity, the inside person matching the outside person. So affections match actions, and that's a lifelong journey. But how powerful to be on that journey, not just ourselves, but as Matthew envisioned with the whole community that is moving in loyalty and love in the same direction. And I think capturing some of that communal sense of how do we help congregations, if we're pastors or leaders, or if we're lay people and we want to lead in our congregation, how do we lead them toward this communal love that is moving out together? Because there's something very powerful about that solidarity, doing it together. We often think about how do I love in my own individual life? That's a great question. But if we're not asking that about in our church context, in our small groups, we're missing something really important. How do we love together? Yeah, it's interesting. One thing that is interesting to me about the Gospels, and I'll defer to my New Testament colleague, is that Jesus, we have the benefit of kind of having the 4 Gospels, right, and then reading into Acts, and we can start the story, and we know where this thing goes. But it is always interesting to me that Jesus sends out disciples who really had no clue. And in my church context, discipleship is, I got to fill out the workbook. I have to fill in all of the blanks. I have to get the right Bible verses. It's a very quiet time in the morning.
That's right. I mean, it's a very programmatic kind of thing. And then maybe we can put somebody in leadership if they have completed Series 4. And that seems. I mean, that is such a strange. Well, I mean, I get where that comes from, right? I mean, I get our Western style. That's right. But I think this idea, and this goes right at the issue of kind of how I learn to love the right things. And this maybe, I'm just speculating, a particular, more of a struggle for Protestants because of our history coming out of the Reformation. And Luther, shall I say, somewhat of a pendulum swing against, at that point, medieval Catholicism of works. And I think there is an ambivalence in Protestantism of the nature that there is somehow a relationship between the choices we make and what we do and our spiritual and moral sensibilities, right? And so I think this, this ethic, I mean, in ethical language, it's this ethic of being and this ethic of doing, and we are both. I mean, we are, yes, we're human beings. So when people say, oh, we're not human doers, yes, we are. We are people who act. We are people who make choices. We are people that, I think, a great degree, have control over the kinds of lives we choose to live. But of course, the theological piece, right, and the moral piece is, what is it that makes that life good and true and noble and just and pure? But I think that's a hugely missing piece, that there is a practice dimension to our faith, and sometimes that practice works against our feelings and against our inclinations in ways that are deeply uncomfortable. But the surprise is, lo and behold, we might actually become more loving.
The practice changes
more
us.
just. It changes us
and
in ways that I think are really,
too. This is,
yeah.
It changes our brains.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book called A General Theory of Love that talks about the wiring we have and what love does and changes, how it changes us. You know, and I'm not far enough into the book to tell you a whole bunch more than that, but the sense of sort of the ways neurologically we are wired.
And from the earliest stages of life.
To love, and also to be impacted by the relational love that we experience.
Yeah.
That came up in our conversation yesterday,
one of
the Roundtable.
Yeah, one of my friends, Todd Hall, says we're loved into loving.
Yeah.
We love because he first loved us. It's this vision of love and response, a relational kind of love, one that a love that follows when it's called.
And it certainly ups the stakes, doesn't it, then, for what it means to be a loving community.
Yes.
And
which is a key question.
What it means to be for a loving family, and especially if, I mean, it is a terrifying relationship, isn't it? That how we show love is really contingent on how we've experienced it. You know, and I know even in pastoral ministry, I mean, you know, talking about God's love is one thing. Creating environments for people to actually experience that love is something quite different. And that, for most people in pastoral ministry, is where the harm, you know, and that is, it's not easy to repair, is it?